The wind cut through the narrow streets of the town like a cold, invisible knife, carrying with it the faint scent of damp earth and smoke from the chimneys. It was early morning, and the mist that clung to the cobblestones gave the entire village an otherworldly, almost suspended quality, as if time itself had decided to linger in this place. At the edge of town, a small child sat on the worn steps of a stone house, his small frame hunched, fingers tracing the intricate carvings in the wood. His eyes, wide and luminous, were fixed on something invisible to anyone else, and when he spoke, the words that fell from his lips were not of this time. He described, with a clarity and precision that chilled the soul, events and places he could never have known. He spoke of a town that had existed over 100 years earlier, naming streets, buildings, and even people with intimate familiarity. Neighbors gathered slowly, drawn first by curiosity and then by a deep, unexplainable fear. They whispered among themselves, unsure whether to laugh or recoil, for the child's knowledge was too specific, too accurate to be mere fantasy. Each memory he recounted came with vivid emotion, the joy of long-forgotten festivals, the sorrow of tragic deaths, and the warmth of a family no longer alive. What unsettled the adults most was not simply the content of his recollections, but the way he spoke of them, as if he had truly lived each moment, breathed the air, and felt the full weight of time itself. As the day wore on, more children began to speak of similar memories. At first, parents dismissed these stories as a product of imagination, a natural extension of childhood curiosity and storytelling. But then patterns emerged. The details matched those recounted by the first child, the same buildings, the same families, the same events that had long since passed into history. Teachers noted unusual behavior in the classroom, children drawing maps of a town that no longer existed, singing songs no one had taught them, or referring to historical events with intimate familiarity. Conversations in homes and marketplaces took on a hushed, tentative tone, as if speaking too loudly about these memories might somehow summon them into reality. A collective unease began to settle over the town, subtle at first, then unmistakable. Adults who had once dismissed these occurrences as childish whimsy now found themselves staying awake at night, replaying the children's words, questioning their own understanding of reality. One mother, clutching her apron tightly, recounted how her daughter had described the layout of a house that had burned down decades ago. The girls spoke of hidden compartments and forgotten heirlooms, naming them all correctly. A local historian verified that each detail corresponded with records, diaries, and old photographs. The realization spread like wildfire, these were not simple coincidences. The children's memories were accurate, unerringly so. Stories of tragedies, of births, of everyday routines from a past no one alive had personally experienced, began to fill the town's homes and streets. The townspeople struggled to reconcile the innocence of these children with the weight of knowledge they claimed to possess. The contrast was dizzying, the purity of youth entwined with the haunting clarity of lives long extinguished. Word of the phenomenon began to reach neighboring villages, bringing strangers to the town's gates, each with their own motives. Some came as skeptics, eager to expose fraud or deception. Others arrived seeking answers, drawn by whispers of something inexplicable that defied natural law. The atmosphere grew charged, tense, as if the air itself held a collective breath, waiting for some invisible climax. Local authorities attempted to maintain order, but they too were caught in the gravitational pull of these revelations. The children, oblivious to the turmoil they had caused, continued their recounting with unshakable conviction. Their voices, sometimes trembling with emotion, sometimes steady and commanding, painted a tapestry of a town that had long ceased to exist, yet lived again in the memories of those who had never truly been there. The adults' reactions varied. Some fell into deep contemplation, grappling with questions of mortality, soul, and the possibility of life beyond the one they knew. Others recoiled, unable to endure the intrusion of history into their present lives, fearing that the children's words were harbingers of misfortune. Gossip became a currency, spreading rapidly from doorstep to doorstep. Each retelling added nuance, embellishment, and speculation, yet the core details remained eerily consistent, reinforcing the undeniable truth of the children's statements. The psychological weight of this awareness began to permeate the town, mistrust in neighbors, sleepless nights, and the creeping sense that the ordinary world was only a thin veil over something far more complex and unsettling. Even the natural world seemed to mirror the town's unease. Shadows stretched longer than they should have, and fog rolled in with an almost sentient deliberation, curling around buildings and trees. Birds fell silent in their flight paths, and the wind itself seemed to whisper secrets through the cracks in the walls. Every corner of the village became a stage for memories that had never belonged to the present, every alley a conduit to a past life that refused to stay buried. Parents began documenting their children's speech, recording names, places, and dates, hoping to make sense of the impossible. Yet, with each new recollection, the mystery deepened rather than resolved. By evening, a chilling pattern had emerged. The children not only remembered lives but also conveyed emotions as if they had truly experienced them, the pride of accomplishments, the grief of loss, the intimacy of familial love. They spoke of people long dead, recounting their habits, personalities, and even private conversations. For the townsfolk, the line between reality and memory blurred. The innocence of childhood became an uncanny conduit to a past no one alive had known, leaving the community to grapple with a question they could not answer: how could a child speak of lives they had never lived with such precision and feeling? In that mist-laden evening, as lanterns flickered in windows and smoke spiraled skyward, the town itself seemed to hold its breath, caught between disbelief and a terrifying awareness that their children had become vessels for a history that refused to remain silent. The town itself was a relic of a bygone era, where narrow cobblestone streets twisted like veins through clusters of weathered buildings, their walls streaked with the fading scars of time. Smoke curled lazily from brick chimneys, carrying the faint, lingering aroma of wood fires and baked bread into the crisp morning air. A river snaked through the outskirts, its dark waters reflecting the muted colors of the sky, as if mirroring the town's own subdued, solemn spirit. Generations of families had lived in this place, their lives interwoven through marriages, trades, and long-standing traditions, and each household carried its own trove of stories and secrets. The sense of continuity was palpable, the old clock tower still tolled at the appointed hours, the bells chimed cutting through the air like a steady heartbeat, marking the passage of time even as the town seemed trapped in its own history. Among the residents, there were families whose roots extended back centuries, their names appearing in faded census records and town ledgers, etched into tombstones in the local graveyard. These families were the ones most entwined with the strange events unfolding through their children. The children who spoke of lives they had never lived were not scattered randomly throughout the town, they were concentrated in households whose histories were deeply entwined with the vanished past they so vividly recalled. In many cases, the ancestors the children described had walked the same streets, worked the same trades, and shared the same domestic spaces as the current residents, long before memory and records faded into obscurity. The contrast between the past and present seemed to hum just beneath the surface of everyday life, like a secret pulse that the adults had forgotten how to perceive, but that the children somehow tapped into with startling clarity. Every household carried a unique atmosphere shaped by history. The old baker's shop, still filled with the sweet scent of yeast and flour, had been in the family for 4 generations. Its walls were lined with photographs of ancestors whose faces seemed to stare back knowingly, their eyes seeming to hint at secrets held over decades. Families living on the outskirts of town had old farmhouses with sagging porches and overgrown gardens, where rusted tools and forgotten implements hinted at a life that had once been painstakingly maintained. It was in these spaces that the children's memories seemed to awaken most vividly, as though the very walls and objects held fragments of past lives waiting to be spoken aloud. Local rituals and customs contributed to a tapestry of cultural memory that blurred the line between past and present. Seasonal festivals were observed with painstaking devotion, their forms largely unchanged for generations. The spring planting ceremonies, the autumn harvest gatherings, and the solemn winter vigils each carried stories and songs that had been passed down through countless descendants. Yet, even in these traditional celebrations, subtle fissures appeared, as children began recalling festivals they had never attended, describing decorations, songs, and customs that predated even the oldest family records. These recollections were not vague or symbolic, they were meticulous, recounting rituals with exact timing, precise wording of prayers, and even the names of people who had participated. The adults could only marvel, and in some cases, shiver at the uncanny precision, sensing that the threads of their own history were somehow being replayed through the voices of the young. Religious observances played a central role in community life. The local church, a stone structure with stained glass windows depicting saints and long-forgotten patrons, was both a spiritual and social hub. Here, sermons echoed the teachings of generations past, emphasizing moral conduct, duty, and the importance of preserving the town's legacy. But even the church could not contain the surge of recollections emerging from the children. During Sunday gatherings, some children would speak of priests, rituals, and events that predated the construction of the church itself. Parishioners, accustomed to hearing about sin and salvation, found themselves unnerved by the specificity of these memories, and some began to question whether faith alone could explain what they were witnessing. The intersection of historical knowledge, memory, and the sacred created a tension that rippled through the community, challenging the very foundations of what people believed to be immutable truth. Daily life in the town, normally predictable and comforting, began to feel precarious under the weight of these revelations. Shopkeepers and craftsmen noticed that the children knew more about certain trades than they should, able to describe techniques and tools from decades earlier as though they had practiced them themselves. Parents were torn between pride in their children's abilities and unease at the source of this knowledge. Conversations at the market or along the riverbank carried a nervous undertone, as if everyone were aware that the ordinary rhythm of life had been disrupted by something outside understanding. The community's collective imagination, once tethered firmly to the present, now waded into the shadowed corridors of memory and time. Even the geography of the town seemed to conspire with the phenomenon. Narrow alleyways, hidden courtyards, and overgrown gardens became stages for the children's recollections. They would point out places that no longer existed or had been altered beyond recognition, naming them as if they were familiar landmarks. Elderly residents, who had walked these streets for decades, were forced to reconcile these descriptions with their own fading memories, sometimes confirming small details that had long been forgotten. Each confirmation, however minor, added weight to the growing sense that the children's memories were not idle fantasy but a portal into a lived past that the town itself had nearly abandoned. The interplay of continuity and decay, of known streets and forgotten corners, created a haunting atmosphere. The town was alive with echoes, and every object, every brick, seemed to hold a story waiting to be remembered. It was against this backdrop that the children's voices resonated most profoundly, bridging centuries of human experience and forcing the townspeople to confront questions about the nature of identity, memory, and the persistence of history. What had once been a place of simple, comforting familiarity became charged with unease, a town suspended between its tangible present and the intangible lives that lingered just beneath the surface. It began as small, almost imperceptible anomalies that adults initially dismissed as the whimsical imaginings of children, the kind of tales that belonged to playgrounds and bedtime stories. At first, it was a single detail here or there, a child pointing to a street that no longer existed, describing the color of a building long since crumbled, or reciting the name of a person whose grave was old and forgotten. These moments were fleeting, easily explained away as coincidence or overheard stories passed down through families. But then patterns began to emerge, patterns that defied rational explanation and grew impossible to ignore. Multiple children, across different households, began recounting the same events with eerie accuracy, their recollections overlapping in time, place, and emotion. It was as though the town itself had become a vessel, replaying fragments of lives long extinguished through the voices of the innocent. Parents started noticing behaviors that seemed out of place, signs that went beyond simple storytelling. Children drew maps with astonishing precision of places they had never visited, sometimes labeling streets and landmarks that no longer existed. They spoke of rituals and festivals with details so exact that the adults around them could scarcely believe it. A little boy described the layout of a house that had burned down decades earlier, recalling the position of furniture, the color of curtains, and even the contents of drawers. A girl hummed a song in a language no one had taught her, recounting verses and melodies documented only in dusty parish records. Teachers were equally perplexed. Some children demonstrated knowledge of historical events and local trades that predated their own lifetimes by decades. Lessons in history became confusing for the adults as the children's first-hand recollections contradicted textbooks and personal knowledge, creating a tension between established fact and unaccountable memory. As the days passed, the anomalies grew more pronounced, and the town began to divide in its response. Some adults were enthralled, drawn to the idea that these children might be speaking truths beyond ordinary comprehension. They meticulously documented every word, noting names, dates, and descriptions, cross-referencing them with town archives, old diaries, and municipal records. Each confirmation sent a shiver through the community. The memories were not only consistent but often disturbingly precise. Others recoiled, unnerved by the uncanny knowledge exhibited by children who should have been ignorant of the past. There was fear in the streets, a subtle tension that wove itself into everyday life. People began to glance over their shoulders, whispering their doubts, worrying that speaking too loudly about these events might invite some unseen consequence, some subtle retribution from the past. The children's recollections were not merely descriptive, they were emotional. They spoke of moments of triumph and moments of sorrow, of weddings and funerals, of simple domestic routines with vivid intimacy. One child described the grief of losing a sibling in a fire, recounting not only the event but the precise expressions, gestures, and even the lingering scent of smoke that had haunted the household decades before. Another described the pride of a young apprentice completing his first work at the blacksmith's forge, recounting the rhythm of hammer against anvil and the heat of coals on his skin. These memories were delivered with a conviction that was impossible to ignore, as if the children were reliving the experiences themselves rather than recounting stories told to them. The adults who witnessed these moments often felt an unsettling mix of awe and dread, struggling to reconcile the innocence of childhood with the weight of such profound recollection. Small communities began to notice subtle changes in the children's behavior. Some spoke in voices or accents that belonged to eras long past, and others displayed knowledge of customs or daily routines that had disappeared with previous generations. They would recognize objects as though they had touched them in a previous life, knowing which cupboard contained what, which corner of the street held a specific flower, or which bridge crossed the river a century ago. Playtimes were often interrupted by sudden, intense focus, as if the children were transported back in time. Parents reported difficulty in guiding them back to present concerns, and even the most mundane questions were met with responses that betrayed an awareness that exceeded their years. This growing dissonance unsettled families, creating a subtle paranoia that threaded through the town. Could one truly trust the innocence of a child when their mind seemed to contain centuries of memory? Local authorities began to take notice, though skeptically at first. Teachers, clergy, and municipal officials convened small gatherings to discuss the phenomenon, seeking a rational explanation. They considered fabrication, suggestion, and exposure to historical texts, but the children's knowledge consistently defied logical patterns. They described not only public events but intimate details of private lives, details that could not have been learned through observation or reading. Diaries, letters, and town archives verified some of these accounts, adding a tangible weight to the otherwise ephemeral recollections. Even the most skeptical adults were forced to pause, questioning their assumptions about the nature of memory, time, and identity. The town had become a living puzzle, each child a piece of a picture that no one could fully comprehend. The psychological impact on families was profound. Some parents experienced a mixture of pride and terror, seeing their children as vessels of remarkable insight yet feeling helpless against forces they could neither control nor explain. Marital and familial tensions arose, as different interpretations of the phenomenon sparked disagreement. Some parents attempted to suppress the children's storytelling, fearing social ostracism or divine disapproval, while others encouraged it, hoping to uncover hidden truths. The contrast between those who embraced the mystery and those who resisted created fissures within households, mirroring the broader unrest settling over the town. Nights became restless, dreams were haunted by fragments of lives long past, often carrying the faces, voices, and emotions described by the children. Sleep offered no refuge from the relentless encroachment of history into the present. As the anomalies accumulated, whispers began to travel beyond the town's borders. Travelers and curious neighbors arrived, hoping to witness the phenomenon firsthand. Some came as skeptics, determined to uncover deceit or manipulation. Others came as seekers, drawn by the allure of the inexplicable, longing for a glimpse of something that transcended ordinary life. The children, unaware of the broader implications, continued their recollections with natural ease, recounting events as if they were narrating a diary written in a distant century. Their precision and emotional depth made the phenomenon all the more compelling, and the adults were forced to grapple with questions of consciousness, memory, and the persistence of life beyond its immediate boundaries. The town itself seemed to respond to the growing tension. Streets that had always been familiar became alien in the foggy mornings, and familiar corners seemed charged with unseen presence. The children's memories breathed life into spaces that had long been forgotten, transforming ordinary rooms, alleyways, and gardens into living archives of time. Adults walking these streets felt the past pressing against the present, sometimes with awe, sometimes with unease, always with the nagging sense that reality was far more fluid than they had ever imagined. Every stone, every tree, seemed to whisper fragments of memory, as if the town itself was conspiring to reveal its hidden past through the voices of the young. The first witnesses to the children's memories were often family members, their initial reactions a mixture of disbelief and unease. Parents would watch their children speak of people they had never met, describing faces and expressions that seemed impossibly real. One mother recalled her daughter describing a great-aunt she had never known, recounting the woman's habits, her laughter, and even the way she tied her hair each morning. The level of detail was so precise that it left the mother speechless, unable to reconcile the innocence of her child with the intimate knowledge being shared. Fathers, too, were confronted with stories that mirrored archival records, old photographs, and family diaries, each anecdote corroborating a past that had been long forgotten but now felt startlingly alive. The children's accounts were so vivid that some adults began keeping notebooks, recording names, dates, and events in an attempt to make sense of what they were witnessing. As these accounts multiplied, whispers began to circulate through the town. Neighbors shared stories with hushed voices, their words carrying the weight of both fascination and fear. Some adults would lean over fences or gather at doorways to recount the uncanny details their children had shared, and in doing so, they discovered that these recollections often overlapped. Multiple children, from different families, described the same events, sometimes naming the same people and places with exactitude. The phenomenon could no longer be dismissed as imagination or coincidence. Conversations at markets, along the riverbank, and in churchyards were tinged with awe and trepidation, as the community collectively began to grapple with a reality that stretched far beyond the ordinary boundaries of understanding. Local historians and scholars were drawn into the unfolding mystery. They pored over town records, birth and death registers, old letters, and faded photographs, seeking any evidence that might explain the children's claims. Time and again, they were confronted with unsettling confirmations. The details the children provided matched records exactly, often including minutiae that no adult in the town could possibly know. One elderly historian recounted being shaken by a child who described the arrangement of furniture in a library that had been demolished decades before. The child spoke of the scent of old parchment, the placement of each desk, and even the way sunlight fell through the windows in the afternoon. These precise recollections, when compared with surviving sketches and photographs, were accurate in every detail. For the adults, the reliability of the children's memories began to overshadow their own skepticism, creating a tension between wonder and fear. The emotional impact on families was profound. Parents struggled to understand the source of these memories while coping with their intensity. Children often spoke of traumatic events, moments of deep sorrow, and the loss of loved ones. One boy described the death of a sibling in excruciating detail, recounting the grief he felt, the sounds of mourning, and even the way neighbors had comforted him. Families were torn between consoling their children in the present and reconciling the lives they were describing from the past. The psychological strain was evident. Some parents became protective to the point of isolation, refusing to allow outsiders to witness the phenomenon, while others sought out interviews and documentation, driven by a desire to understand the unexplainable. The weight of living with such a persistent, detailed, and emotionally charged phenomenon began to alter daily routines, social interactions, and familial bonds. Teachers and school administrators also became witnesses to the anomalies. In classrooms, children would speak of events and customs from eras long before they were born. They demonstrated knowledge of local trades, historic events, and cultural practices that seemed impossible for their age. Lessons were interrupted as students insisted on recounting details with conviction, often correcting historical inaccuracies presented in textbooks. Educators found themselves in a strange position, simultaneously responsible for guiding young minds while also acknowledging truths that defied conventional teaching. Some attempted to redirect or suppress the recollections, concerned about classroom order and parental reaction, but the children's certainty was unwavering, and their memories spilled over into all aspects of daily life. The town itself began to feel charged with tension. Streets, once familiar and comforting, took on an almost uncanny quality as children named places that had long since vanished or been altered beyond recognition. Small parks, alleys, and even abandoned buildings became stages for the unfolding narrative, as if the town itself were being recalled into existence by the children's voices. Local residents reported a heightened awareness of their surroundings, the air felt thicker with memory, shadows seemed to linger longer than before, and familiar buildings appeared infused with the presence of those long gone. The blending of present and past created an eerie atmosphere, one in which ordinary life and historical recollection collided, leaving townsfolk unsettled and uncertain. Religious leaders became reluctantly involved as well. The town's church, historically a place of guidance and moral authority, found itself confronting questions it had never faced. Children spoke of priests and ceremonies that had existed long before the current congregation, sometimes recounting sermons or rituals with word-for-word accuracy. Clergy attempted to contextualize these memories within doctrine, sometimes dismissing them as imagination or temptation, yet even they could not fully explain the precision and emotional resonance of the recollections. Parishioners began to whisper that perhaps these memories were more than coincidence, that perhaps the children were channels through which history itself spoke, bridging a temporal divide that no one had thought possible. Strangers began arriving in town, drawn by rumors of the inexplicable phenomenon. Some were skeptics, seeking to uncover deceit or trickery. Others were researchers, writers, and curious travelers, hoping to witness firsthand the memories that had captivated and unsettled the town. The children's recounting did not falter in the presence of outsiders, they spoke with the same conviction, the same intricate detail, drawing the attention of anyone who listened. Visitors were often astonished, some documenting the events meticulously, others left speechless by the sheer depth and accuracy of what they witnessed. The town became a focal point for a broader inquiry, yet the local residents themselves remained at the heart of the mystery, caught between normal life and the unrelenting intrusion of past lives into their present. As more witnesses came forward, the cumulative effect became undeniable. The children's memories were not isolated incidents, they were a phenomenon that spanned multiple households, multiple families, and multiple generations of recollection. Each account added new dimensions, filling in the intricate tapestry of history that the town had almost forgotten. Adults found themselves re-examining their own assumptions about reality, identity, and memory. Conversations became layered with speculation, awe, and fear, as everyone grappled with the unsettling realization that the past might not be as fixed and distant as they had believed. The town, already steeped in history, now pulsed with the living echoes of lives long vanished, and every witness felt the weight of knowing that the children were speaking truths that could not be ignored. The town's adults, already unsettled by the children's recollections, soon found themselves confronting a collective force of denial and suppression. Religious leaders, sensing a threat to established authority and doctrine, began to caution families, warning that indulging the children's memories might lead to spiritual confusion or moral error. Sermons became pointed, emphasizing obedience, the importance of faith, and the dangers of listening to things beyond human understanding. Parents, fearful of judgment from neighbors or the local clergy, often tried to redirect conversations, discouraging their children from speaking of past lives or urging them to focus on their present. These interventions, however well-intentioned, only seemed to increase the intensity of the children's memories, as if the very act of suppression amplified the urgency with which these past lives demanded acknowledgement. Families struggled with the tension between social conformity and personal truth. Those who encouraged the children's storytelling were viewed with suspicion, sometimes accused of fostering delusion or even of dabbling in forbidden knowledge. Families who attempted to silence their children were plagued by a sense of guilt, feeling as if they were denying the very essence of the children's experiences. The children themselves often reacted with confusion and frustration, unable to understand why adults would not listen to something that felt so real to them. Their insistence on recounting these memories became a quiet form of resistance, a way of asserting the validity of what they had experienced despite the external pressure to remain silent. The townspeople were forced to navigate a delicate social balance. On one hand, the phenomenon challenged deeply held beliefs, questioning the finality of death, the linearity of time, and the boundaries of memory. On the other hand, social cohesion demanded that unusual claims be contained, managed, or ignored. Conversations in the marketplace, at the riverbank, and even in private homes became laden with caution, as adults attempted to speak about the events without attracting scrutiny or judgment. Whispers carried far more weight than outright statements, and rumors spread quickly, some true, some distorted. Even as denial and suppression took hold, the evidence of the children's memories was everywhere: the drawings, the songs, the knowledge that could not have been acquired through ordinary means. This contradiction created a subtle but pervasive tension, a quiet unease that touched every corner of the town. Local authorities became indirectly involved, often caught between the pressure to maintain social order and the undeniable reality of the children's recollections. Teachers and town officials struggled to mediate conflicts, sometimes finding themselves accused of either encouraging falsehood or ignoring truth. The suppression of the children's memories was not uniform. Some families and institutions attempted to enforce silence rigorously, while others reluctantly documented and verified the details, creating an uneven response that added to the confusion. Even within a single household, parents might disagree, one parent insisting on the primacy of tradition, the other compelled to investigate the inexplicable truth unfolding before them. This division further destabilized the town, eroding confidence in previously unassailable social structures and leaving families uncertain about how to navigate their everyday lives. The children's memories, far from being quelled, began to grow more vivid under pressure. Attempts at suppression often led to unexpected surges of detail, as if the recollections were asserting themselves in defiance. Some children would wake in the night, recounting events with precision and emotion that mirrored real occurrences from the past. They spoke of births, deaths, and family disputes, sometimes describing intimate gestures or conversations that no living person could remember. Adults listening to these stories were forced to confront the uncomfortable possibility that denying the children's experiences might not protect them, but instead isolate them from the truth of what they were experiencing. The act of repression created its own tension, intensifying the very phenomenon that people sought to suppress. Religious and social commentary began to frame the children's memories as a moral challenge. Clergy suggested that the children were being tested, that the memories might represent temptation, divine warning, or moral instruction. Some families adhered to these interpretations, counseling their children to ignore the voices of the past, to concentrate on the present, and to resist engaging with the memories. Others quietly documented each account, preserving records and cross-referencing details with town archives and genealogical materials. In this way, the community became a patchwork of denial and documentation, with one segment striving to erase evidence, and another segment preserving it meticulously. This duality created a charged atmosphere, wherein the act of remembering itself became politically, socially, and spiritually fraught. Despite the pressures to conform, the children continued to recount events with a precision that defied ordinary explanation. They described the architecture of houses that no longer existed, named residents who had passed away decades prior, and recounted private conversations with emotional nuance. Their insistence on authenticity, combined with the corroboration of historical records, forced the community to confront a paradox: the memories were too precise to be dismissed, yet acknowledging them risked social censure, religious admonition, or accusations of heresy. This tension created an undercurrent of fear, a subtle anxiety that permeated both family life and public spaces. Town gatherings, markets, and church services became arenas where the visible and invisible worlds collided, as adults navigated the uneasy space between rational denial and the undeniable truth embodied by the children. The broader social impact was profound. Adults reported subtle changes in behavior, both among themselves and within their families. Sleepless nights, whispered debates, and private fears began to erode the previously stable rhythms of life. Parents who once felt certain in their understanding of the world now questioned the nature of reality itself. Conversations turned cautious, social interactions measured, and public behavior governed by a complex calculus of truth, discretion, and moral obligation. Even the physical spaces of the town took on an air of tension, as familiar streets, buildings, and landscapes were imbued with the lingering presence of past lives recalled through the children's words. The phenomenon also exposed deep divides within the community. Some families embraced the children's memories, believing them to be windows into spiritual or historical truths, while others viewed them as dangerous distractions, potentially opening the town to chaos or divine disfavor. The conflict between acceptance and suppression intensified the social fabric, introducing subtle hostility, mistrust, and anxiety into interactions that had previously been ordinary. Even seemingly mundane activities, walking along familiar streets, attending religious services, or sharing meals, were infused with the tension of unspoken questions and concealed knowledge. The children, oblivious to the full consequences, simply continued to speak, bringing the past vividly into the present and forcing the community to navigate the uncomfortable collision of memory, authority, and belief. Through this interplay of denial, suppression, and persistence, the town found itself trapped in a liminal space between history and the present. The memories of the children refused to be contained, creating a silent but undeniable pressure that touched every aspect of life. Adults wrestled with fear, faith, and fascination, unsure how to balance the demands of social cohesion with the undeniable evidence unfolding before them. The children became the unintentional catalysts for a profound examination of reality itself, their memories serving as both illumination and disruption, challenging the assumptions that had long guided the town and reshaping the way its inhabitants perceived time, identity, and the boundaries of human understanding. As the children's memories grew more vivid, the psychological impact on families and the broader town became impossible to ignore. Parents reported subtle changes in their children's behavior, small shifts that suggested the experiences of the past were seeping into the present. Some children would wake abruptly in the middle of the night, speaking in the voices of people long gone, recounting events with a clarity and emotion that could only be described as lived experience. The words were not simple fragments, they were complete narratives, filled with sensory detail, the rhythm of conversation, and the cadence of a life long past. Parents found themselves listening with a mixture of awe and fear, unsure how to respond to experiences that defied logic yet felt undeniably real. In the households affected, tension began to mount. Siblings grew wary of one another, sometimes mimicking or correcting the recollections of their peers as though competing for authenticity. Families struggled to maintain normal routines, as meal times, lessons, and play were interrupted by sudden demands to recount or relive memories. Some children seemed emotionally burdened by the intensity of their experiences, displaying periods of withdrawal, sadness, or anxiety that mirrored the events they described. One boy, for example, would curl up on his bedroom floor, clutching a worn handkerchief as he spoke of a sibling lost in a house fire decades before, the grief and panic so vivid that it left him physically trembling. Parents were torn between comforting their children in the present and fearing the weight of these past lives encroaching on their daily existence. The community, as a whole, began to feel the ripple effects of this phenomenon. Local schools struggled to balance education with the extraordinary claims of their students. Teachers found that standard lessons were interrupted by students recounting historical details in precise, personal terms, sometimes correcting the adults' own understanding of local history. The town's adults, who had once dismissed these occurrences as fleeting fantasies, now faced the stark reality that these children were conveying information no one alive could have known. Even those who were initially skeptical could not ignore the consistency and emotional depth of the stories. Researchers, visiting scholars, and curious neighbors began documenting events, interviewing families, and comparing accounts to historical records. Each verification only intensified the town's unease, blurring the line between the ordinary present and a past that seemed almost tangible. The children's memories often included elements of trauma and joy alike. They spoke of long-ago celebrations, the anticipation of festivals, and the simple pleasures of daily life, meals shared with family, games played in alleys, or songs sung in distant homes. Yet, they also recounted sorrowful events, the loss of loved ones, accidents, disputes, and tragedies that had shaped the lives of those long deceased. These recollections carried the weight of emotion, often leaving the children drained and the adults in a state of quiet alarm. Families attempted to shield their children from the social pressure of the outside world, but the phenomenon could not be contained. Even isolated households reported that memories emerged spontaneously, triggered by objects, smells, or fleeting sounds, as though the town itself were echoing through their children. Medical and psychological professionals were drawn into the growing mystery. Some attempted to interpret the experiences as forms of trauma, genetic memory, or heightened imagination, but these explanations failed to account for the precision, specificity, and emotional resonance of the accounts. Children spoke of events in distant houses with exact details, named long-deceased neighbors, and described occurrences confirmed by town records and photographs. Doctors and psychologists acknowledged the extraordinary nature of the phenomenon but found themselves limited by the inability to measure or quantify experiences that seemed to transcend the conventional understanding of time and memory. The community watched these efforts with a mixture of hope and skepticism, yearning for answers yet recognizing that no conventional explanation could fully capture the reality unfolding before them. The atmosphere in the town became increasingly tense. Public spaces, once neutral, now carried an uncanny weight. Streets, markets, and churchyards seemed infused with memory, each corner resonating with the presence of lives that had long since ended. Adults found themselves walking more cautiously, observing buildings and objects with heightened awareness, sometimes questioning whether the past they remembered personally might be incomplete or flawed. The blending of lived experience with recalled memory created an unsettling sense that the town itself was living on multiple temporal planes at once, its history and present intertwined in a delicate, often disorienting dance. The emotional and social strain on families deepened over time. Siblings and neighbors were sometimes at odds, debating the accuracy of recollections or interpreting the meaning of memories differently. Parents struggled to mediate these conflicts while coping with the psychological weight of the phenomenon themselves. Some families withdrew from public life, fearing judgment or unwanted attention, while others sought to share their children's experiences with researchers, journalists, or neighbors willing to listen. The dual pressures of internal family dynamics and external scrutiny created an ongoing tension that permeated nearly every aspect of daily life. Even moments of ordinary life were altered. Children would pause mid-activity to recall details of past events, their focus shifting abruptly to conversations, locations, or experiences from long ago. Meals were interrupted by recollections of long-dead relatives, playtime sometimes replaced by intricate narratives of streets and homes that no longer existed. Adults, already strained by social and religious pressures, had to balance care for their children with attempts to preserve order and maintain a sense of normalcy. The ordinary rhythms of life were disrupted, replaced by a constant negotiation between present needs and past echoes that insisted on being heard. Despite these challenges, some families found ways to embrace the phenomenon. They documented each recollection, cross-referencing names, dates, and locations with historical records, creating a repository of knowledge that both validated and preserved the children's accounts. These families sometimes became informal educators within the community, helping others understand and navigate the intensity of the experiences. Even in these cases, however, the emotional toll remained significant. Children were burdened by the weight of memories that were not their own, and parents bore the responsibility of guiding them through a complex and often frightening reality. As the weeks and months progressed, it became clear that the children's memories were not temporary or superficial. They persisted, evolving in depth and clarity, and the psychological effects on the community became more pronounced. The town's adults, now accustomed to the extraordinary claims, still struggled with disbelief, hope, fear, and curiosity. Daily life was irrevocably altered, as the past infiltrated the present in ways that were both awe-inspiring and profoundly unsettling. Families lived with the knowledge that their children were experiencing something that could not be fully explained, and the town itself seemed poised on the edge of an invisible boundary, suspended between reality and memory, between disbelief and undeniable truth. As the children's recollections continued to deepen, attempts to explain the phenomenon began to take shape, though no explanation seemed adequate. Families, scholars, and local authorities explored a variety of theories, each attempting to make sense of what had upended the town's perception of reality. Some suggested that the children were unusually gifted, perhaps demonstrating prodigious memory or imagination. Others speculated that the town itself held some mysterious energy, a resonance of the past imprinted upon the land that allowed the young to access it. Conversations grew more technical, with parents consulting historians, psychologists, and even folklorists, all seeking a framework to interpret the extraordinary events unfolding in their midst. Yet, for every theory proposed, the children's accounts continued to defy the constraints of conventional logic. One of the earliest and most widely discussed ideas was that of genetic memory, the hypothesis that traits, experiences, or even memories could be passed down through generations via biological inheritance. While some families embraced this explanation, noting the remarkable similarities between the children's recollections and the lives of their ancestors, others found it insufficient. The specificity of the memories, complete with accurate dates, detailed descriptions of long-gone objects, and intimate emotional experiences, stretched the concept beyond plausible scientific limits. Even historians and genealogists, who were meticulous in verifying details, acknowledged that no existing theory of heredity could account for the depth and precision of the children's knowledge. Other attempts to explain the phenomenon leaned toward the mystical. Some townspeople considered spiritual channels, suggesting that the children were mediums or conduits through which the voices of the dead spoke. Priests and religious leaders debated whether these memories were divine messages, tests of faith, or perhaps even a form of temptation or demonic influence. Families were divided. Some welcomed the idea of spiritual guidance, feeling reassured that the children were connected to a higher purpose, while others resisted the notion, worried that acknowledging such forces would lead to social condemnation or moral danger. This spiritual lens added a layer of complexity, intertwining belief, fear, and reverence in a way that magnified the town's anxiety. Folklore and local legends provided another angle for interpretation. Stories of reincarnation, ancestral memory, and haunted spaces were part of the town's oral tradition, passed down through generations. While many dismissed these tales as fanciful, others noted the uncanny parallels between folklore and the children's precise accounts. Ancient narratives of lives repeating, spirits lingering, or places preserving memory were suddenly given tangible form through the experiences of the young. Adults who had once laughed at these tales now found themselves revisiting them, questioning whether fragments of wisdom, passed down in story, were somehow manifesting in the real world. The children, unaware of the debates their memories were inspiring, continued to recount events with unwavering certainty, further blurring the line between myth and reality. Scientific approaches were also explored, though they yielded little clarity. Psychologists and cognitive specialists examined the children for evidence of trauma, hyperimagination, or collective suggestion. They conducted interviews, memory tests, and behavioral observations, attempting to uncover a psychological mechanism that could explain the phenomenon. While these studies often revealed exceptional recall and focus, they could not account for the consistent alignment with historical records, nor the emotional authenticity of the recollections. Some researchers suggested that the phenomenon might involve a form of collective consciousness or a shared psychic imprint, but such ideas were largely speculative and lacked empirical support. Still, the possibility that the children were accessing something beyond ordinary cognition became increasingly difficult for the town to dismiss. The inability to reach a definitive explanation had tangible effects on the town. Families oscillated between hope and despair, trying to understand their children's experiences while confronting the limits of human knowledge. Public discussions grew cautious, layered with uncertainty and fear of being misunderstood or ridiculed. Adults who had once been confident in their understanding of the world now questioned the very nature of memory, time, and identity. Scholars visiting the town expressed admiration for the rigor with which families documented details, but they were equally forced to admit that conventional frameworks were inadequate. Even those committed to rationality were confronted with a phenomenon that appeared to defy reason, a living puzzle that challenged the boundaries of science, religion, and philosophy simultaneously. Attempts to explain the children's memories also generated tension within families. Parents disagreed on which theories to trust or pursue, and children sometimes resisted attempts to categorize or rationalize their experiences. One family, convinced of a spiritual interpretation, insisted that the memories be treated as sacred, while a neighboring household prioritized historical documentation and factual verification. These conflicting approaches created subtle friction, as each family navigated the tension between belief, evidence, and the psychological well-being of the children. The effort to reconcile multiple explanations with daily life placed an extraordinary burden on the community, highlighting the fragility of social cohesion in the face of unexplainable phenomena. Despite these challenges, some positive outcomes emerged from the attempts to understand the phenomenon. Families developed meticulous records, cross-referencing each recollection with historical documents, photographs, and personal accounts. These archives became a resource for the town, preserving knowledge that had been nearly lost to time and offering a structured way to engage with the children's memories. Schools incorporated the verification process into lessons, allowing children to learn about history in a hands-on manner that linked their experiences to broader narratives. Even the most skeptical adults found a measure of solace in the documentation process, as it provided a tangible method to approach something otherwise ineffable. Yet, no matter how comprehensive the documentation or how elaborate the theories, the phenomenon resisted containment. The children's memories were vivid, detailed, and emotionally resonant in ways that could not be fully captured on paper or explained by any existing framework. Every new recollection, every corroborated detail, challenged the town to reconsider the boundaries of understanding. The coexistence of multiple theories, scientific, spiritual, folkloric, and historical, created an ongoing dialogue, but one without resolution, leaving the town suspended between curiosity, reverence, and unease. As the children's extraordinary recollections continued to unfold, the town began to experience a profound and pervasive shift in its daily rhythm, social dynamics, and collective consciousness. Families, once bound by ordinary routines and familiar interactions, now found themselves navigating a complex landscape shaped by the persistent presence of these memories. Parents struggled to balance the demands of everyday life with the intensity of the children's experiences, aware that each recollection was not mere imagination but vivid accounts of lives long past. Even ordinary activities such as meals, chores, or playtime became imbued with an extraordinary weight, as adults and children alike negotiated the intersection of present reality with memories that seemed to intrude from another time. Isolation became a common response for many families. In an effort to protect the children from scrutiny, misunderstanding, or ridicule, parents often limited social interactions, restricted access to public spaces, and avoided large gatherings. These precautions provided temporary relief, yet they also reinforced the children's unique position within the community, creating a sense of separation from neighbors and friends. The balance between shielding the children and fostering social engagement became an ongoing challenge. Some families found themselves torn, wanting to preserve normalcy while simultaneously safeguarding the extraordinary experiences that had upended their lives. Over time, the isolation created subtle fractures in community cohesion, as differing approaches to the phenomenon highlighted contrasting values, fears, and priorities. The children themselves were deeply affected by the attention and responses their memories generated. While some embraced their role as carriers of the past, confidently recounting events with precision. Others displayed anxiety, withdrawal, or moments of emotional intensity that reflected the weight of what they were experiencing. They often sensed the gravity of the attention they attracted, aware, even as young children, that their words carried significance beyond their understanding. Episodes of agitation, tears, or emotional overwhelm were not uncommon, particularly when describing tragic events, personal losses, or intimate details of the lives they recalled. Adults became mediators and protectors, striving to provide emotional support while respecting the integrity of the recollections, a delicate balance that required constant attention and care. The town itself seemed to respond to the shifting reality. Streets, buildings, and public spaces, once familiar and neutral, now felt layered with memory. Residents reported fleeting impressions, the faint aroma of a long-vanished bakery, a sudden echo of voices in empty corridors, or the subtle sensation of someone long gone having walked through a space. These experiences reinforced the perception that the town existed on multiple temporal levels simultaneously, where past and present were interwoven. This layered reality created both wonder and unease, making everyday life a careful negotiation of presence, observation, and respect for the unseen weight of history. Psychological strain on the adults became increasingly evident. Parents described heightened anxiety, sleepless nights, and the persistent sense that the past was actively asserting itself in the present. The children's recollections challenged conventional understandings of time, memory, and identity, prompting deep reflection on mortality, legacy, and the persistence of human experience. Ordinary tasks, whether tending gardens, walking through familiar streets, or performing household routines, were now imbued with an awareness of the extraordinary, subtly altering perception and emotional engagement. Adults became increasingly attuned to nuance, aware that even small cues could trigger a memory or recollection, requiring careful navigation of both words and actions. The phenomenon reshaped the town's relationship with history itself. Records, photographs, diaries, and archives were no longer static repositories, they became active tools for verifying the children's recollections. Families meticulously compared accounts to historical documentation, uncovering connections, corroborating events, and revealing details that had long been forgotten. Children, in some instances, actively guided these efforts, pointing out discrepancies, highlighting overlooked information, or recalling elements that had been lost to time. The town became a living archive, where personal narrative, historical verification, and emotional resonance merged, creating an unprecedented dynamic in which memory was not simply preserved but lived, witnessed, and continuously interpreted. Community dynamics reflected the complexity of navigating these extraordinary circumstances. Families who openly engaged with the children's memories were sometimes contrasted with those who chose discretion or skepticism. Social interactions, once routine and predictable, now required careful consideration, as conversations could inadvertently trigger recollections or reveal knowledge that might unsettle others. Even casual exchanges became layered with meaning, as residents negotiated the boundaries between private experience and communal awareness. This cautious social landscape created a fragile equilibrium, requiring continuous adjustment and subtle sensitivity to both the extraordinary phenomenon and the emotional well-being of those involved. The children's experiences also fostered philosophical and spiritual reflection within the town. Adults pondered the meaning of the memories, questioning whether they represented lessons, warnings, or insights into human existence and continuity. Families developed rituals, quiet practices, and periods of reflection to honor the recollections while providing emotional stability. These activities, though understated, helped integrate the memories into daily life, offering a framework through which adults and children could navigate a world transformed by events beyond ordinary understanding. Such practices became a mechanism for processing the extraordinary, creating a structured way to coexist with the past while remaining anchored in the present. Even with these measures, uncertainty persisted. No theory, scientific, spiritual, or folkloric, fully accounted for the depth, precision, and persistence of the children's memories. Families learned to accept this ambiguity, balancing curiosity with caution, engagement with discretion, and acknowledgement with restraint. The town existed in a liminal space, where normal routines intersected with extraordinary recollections, and where the ordinary and the miraculous coexisted in subtle, enduring ways. Ultimately, the ongoing phenomenon became a defining characteristic of the town. Streets, homes, and public spaces were imbued with invisible traces of memory. Families adapted, preserving records, guiding children, and negotiating social and emotional challenges with care and diligence. The children, through their vivid recollections, continued to bridge past and present, leaving an indelible impression on the community. The town, forever changed, existed in a state of heightened awareness, where memory, history, and human experience interwove continuously, creating a quiet yet profound legacy that would shape generations to come. The aftermath of the children's memories left a profound and pervasive impact on the town, reaching far beyond individual families to touch the very structure of the community. Even as the intensity of the phenomenon began to wane for some children, others continued to speak of past lives with clarity and conviction, leaving adults perpetually on edge, never certain what might be revealed in the next conversation or quiet moment. The once ordinary streets, homes, and public spaces now carried a subtle but undeniable weight, as if each corner retained the echoes of events long past. Families learned to navigate this transformed reality, balancing the demands of everyday life with the lingering presence of experiences that defied conventional understanding. Parents and guardians became custodians of memory, meticulously documenting the children's recollections. Notebooks, scrapbooks, and family records accumulated, filled with names, dates, events, and descriptions, each one cross-referenced against surviving documents, photographs, and historical records. These efforts were driven not only by curiosity but by necessity. Parents felt a growing responsibility to preserve the integrity of the children's experiences and to protect them from skepticism, ridicule, or misinterpretation. In the process, the town collectively amassed a rich archive of memory, blending personal narrative, historical record, and emotional resonance in a way that blurred the lines between past and present. Despite these measures, the social fabric of the town was subtly but irreversibly altered. Families who had engaged openly with the phenomenon often found themselves isolated from neighbors who viewed the experiences with suspicion or disapproval. Skepticism and fear coexisted with awe and fascination, creating a community in which trust and communication required careful navigation. Social gatherings, once casual and easy, were now marked by an undercurrent of tension, as adults considered what was appropriate to share and what should remain private. Even in quiet, everyday interactions, the presence of the children's memories introduced a heightened awareness, an unspoken acknowledgement that ordinary life had been forever altered by the extraordinary. The children themselves became central figures in the ongoing social recalibration. Some embraced their recollections with confidence, speaking with vivid detail about lives and events far removed from their own, while others displayed unease, sensing the magnitude of the attention their experiences drew. Parents, teachers, and neighbors often had to mediate these interactions, guiding the children gently while balancing the need to protect their emotional well-being. Moments of emotional intensity were common. Children could become tearful, withdrawn, or agitated when recounting tragic events from the past, particularly when the details involved loss, danger, or suffering. These episodes served as stark reminders that the memories were not abstract, but lived experiences with profound emotional weight, capable of affecting both the young and the adults who bore witness. The town itself seemed to respond to this shift in subtle but pervasive ways. Familiar locations, the churchyard, the marketplace, and even the narrow alleyways between homes, became infused with memory, each space layered with the details of events described by the children. Residents reported feeling fleeting impressions of the past in ordinary settings, a scent reminiscent of a long-gone bakery, the echo of voices in an empty room, or the sensation that someone unseen was present in a familiar street. These ephemeral experiences reinforced the sense that the town had become a living archive, a place where the past and present coexisted, creating both wonder and unease for those who had once taken their surroundings for granted. The psychological impact on adults was pronounced. Parents described feelings of awe, anxiety, and persistent vigilance, their awareness of time, mortality, and human experience reshaped by the children's words. Even mundane tasks, preparing meals, tending gardens, or walking through town, were colored by the knowledge that the past was actively speaking through the present. Conversations became laden with caution and reflection, as adults sought to navigate the delicate balance between acknowledging the extraordinary and preserving social cohesion. Families became acutely aware that each interaction, no matter how casual, could prompt memories or narratives that carried unexpected significance, demanding careful consideration of words, tone, and attention. The phenomenon also fostered a new relationship with history. What had once been static records, town registries, diaries, photographs, and letters, were now alive with meaning, corroborated by the children's accounts. Historical research was no longer an academic exercise, it became deeply personal, a way for families to connect with ancestors and validate experiences that had once seemed inaccessible. Children were sometimes actively involved in this process, their recollections guiding adults to forgotten corners of archives or pointing out details overlooked in historical documentation. The town became a place of living history, where memory, verification, and emotional resonance intersected to create an unprecedented understanding of the past. Community dynamics remained complex. Families who embraced the phenomenon openly were often contrasted with those who maintained discretion, creating subtle divisions and unspoken hierarchies within social groups. Some adults actively shared records and details with neighbors and visiting researchers, seeking understanding or validation, while others opted for privacy, fearing misunderstanding or judgment. This duality reinforced the sense that the town now existed in a liminal state, caught between the ordinary and the extraordinary, where every decision carried weight, and every disclosure had the potential to ripple through the community. Even with careful documentation and social adaptation, unresolved questions persisted. No single theory, scientific, spiritual, or folkloric, fully explained the depth, precision, and emotional intensity of the children's memories. The coexistence of multiple interpretations created ongoing debate, reflecting the difficulty of reconciling personal experience with conventional understanding. Families learned to live with uncertainty, accepting that some truths might remain elusive while cherishing the undeniable reality of the phenomenon that had transformed their lives. Ultimately, the aftermath became a defining feature of the town's identity. The presence of past lives, mediated through the children's recollections, left an indelible mark on families, social dynamics, and the town itself. Streets, homes, and public spaces retained an invisible yet palpable sense of memory. Adults carried the knowledge of the extraordinary into every interaction, observation, and decision. Children grew within a world profoundly shaped by histories they had lived but could not fully claim as their own. The town had been altered in ways both subtle and profound, existing thereafter in a state of quiet awareness, where the ordinary and the extraordinary coexisted, and the echoes of lives long past remained present, persistent, and impossible to ignore. In the months that followed, the town became a place of quiet reflection and lingering curiosity, the extraordinary events leaving a permanent imprint on the collective consciousness of its residents. Families continued to navigate the delicate balance between normal life and the persistent presence of the children's memories. While some children had begun to speak less frequently of past lives, others remained vivid in their recollections, recounting events, locations, and emotions from decades gone with an intensity that defied ordinary understanding. These memories were no longer mere curiosities, they had become threads weaving together the past and present, reshaping how the community perceived time, identity, and history itself. Many parents took it upon themselves to create comprehensive records, cataloging every name, date, location, and anecdote described by their children. These records were meticulously cross-referenced with archival documents, old newspapers, photographs, and town registries, creating an extensive repository of historical verification. The process became almost ritualistic, a way for adults to maintain some sense of control in a world that had become unpredictable and emotionally charged. Each new corroboration strengthened both awe and unease, confirming that the children's memories were more than imagination or coincidence. Over time, these records evolved into a town archive of sorts, a living testament to the lives that had once existed and the unusual conduit through which they were being remembered. Despite this careful documentation, questions and debates continued to ripple through the community. Scholars, visiting researchers, and curious travelers who had previously documented the children's recollections returned periodically, bringing with them new theories and interpretations. Some proposed reincarnation, others suggested a form of collective memory, and a few considered spiritual or supernatural explanations. No single theory satisfied everyone, and the coexistence of multiple interpretations created an ongoing dialogue that was both fascinating and exhausting for the adults who lived amidst it. Families found themselves navigating not only the mystery of the children's memories but also the competing interpretations that shaped community perception and social dynamics. The children themselves became aware of the impact their memories had on those around them. Some appeared to embrace their role as storytellers of the past, recounting events with the clarity and precision that had characterized their earliest recollections. Others showed signs of fatigue or discomfort, sensing that their words carried weight and responsibility that they could not fully comprehend. Parents and teachers often mediated these experiences, guiding children gently while attempting to maintain the integrity of the accounts. This careful navigation was essential, as the children's recollections were emotionally vivid, sometimes depicting tragedies or intimate family moments from decades ago with a realism that could be both compelling and distressing. The town streets, buildings, and public spaces had also been transformed by the phenomenon. Familiar locations were imbued with layers of memory, as residents began to see them not only in the present but through the lens of past events described by the children. Streets that had once been ordinary were now linked to specific historical moments, buildings associated with long-deceased families, and public squares tied to celebrations and tragedies from decades prior. This layering of memory and place created an almost cinematic quality to daily life, where the past seemed to coexist alongside the present in subtle, haunting ways. The town itself became a living archive, a space in which memory, emotion, and history intersected continuously, and where ordinary experiences were colored by the vivid recollections of those long gone. Community dynamics continued to shift under the weight of these experiences. Families who had once disagreed on how to approach the phenomenon found themselves negotiating new forms of understanding. Some embraced the memories openly, integrating them into daily life, rituals, and social interactions, while others maintained a degree of discretion, sharing their knowledge only with trusted neighbors or researchers. The tension between engagement and privacy created a nuanced social landscape, one in which conversations were measured and every disclosure weighed carefully. Even routine events, such as church attendance, market visits, or school activities, were subtly influenced by the awareness that the past could manifest at any moment through the children's recollections. The phenomenon also inspired broader reflection on mortality, identity, and human connection. Adults pondered the implications of lives remembered across decades, wondering what it meant for their understanding of time and existence. Conversations about history became more personal and emotionally charged, as townspeople recognized that the past was not simply a series of dates and facts but a continuum of lived experience that could be accessed, remembered, and felt. Some families adopted spiritual or philosophical practices to honor these recollections, incorporating quiet rituals, reflection periods, or commemorative gatherings into their routines. These practices help stabilize the emotional landscape, providing a framework through which adults and children could coexist with the extraordinary reality that had reshaped their lives. Even with these efforts, unresolved questions persisted. No explanation, scientific, spiritual, or folkloric, fully accounted for the precision, emotional depth, and persistence of the children's memories. Families continued to document and verify accounts, yet every new confirmation opened further avenues of inquiry, leaving the town in a state of ongoing curiosity and quiet tension. The coexistence of multiple interpretations, rational, mystical, and historical, created a complex intellectual and emotional environment, one that required adults to accept uncertainty while honoring the undeniable reality of the phenomenon. Ultimately, the children's recollections left an enduring legacy. They had transformed the town, reshaping its understanding of history, community, and the fragile boundary between past and present. Families, scholars, and residents had learned to navigate a world in which memory, emotion, and history intertwined continuously, leaving every aspect of daily life subtly altered. The town, once ordinary, now existed as a place where time was fluid, where the echoes of lives long gone persisted in living voices, and where every conversation, observation, and interaction was enriched by the enduring presence of memory itself. Even as the children grew older and some memories faded, the imprint remained, an invisible thread linking generations and reminding the town of the extraordinary events that had quietly transformed it forever.